The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, too quiet, and the air had a strange heaviness to it, like a storm was brewing. I sat in the living room with my feet curled under me, a blanket draped across my lap, and the muted hum of the television providing some comfort. The glass of wine on the coffee table had gone untouched for over an hour. My eyes flicked toward the window, the curtains barely drawn. That's when I saw her for the first time. A woman stood across the street, just outside the reach of the nearest street lamp. Her face was obscured, but her stance was unmistakable. She was watching me. My chest tightened and I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe she was lost. I got up, feigning nonchalance, and pulled the curtains shut. As I did, a sense of relief washed over me. Out of sight, out of mind. I laughed nervously at my own paranoia, muttering something about watching too many crime shows. The next morning, I dismissed the encounter as a figment of my imagination. Daylight had a way of making the sinister seem absurd. But when I stepped outside to retrieve the mail, I noticed something peculiar. Footprints in the frost-covered grass leading to my window. They weren't mine. They were too small. I stood there, staring at the footprints, the mail forgotten in my hand. My pulse quickened. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching me. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but what would I say? That I saw a woman on the street and found some footprints? It wasn't enough. I decided to install cameras around the house. It felt like an overreaction, but it also gave me a sense of control. By the end of the day, I had one camera overlooking the front door, another covering the backyard, and one pointing directly at the living room window where I'd seen her. I slept a little easier that night. 2 days passed without incident, and I started to think maybe I'd been imagining things. But on the third night, as I reviewed the camera footage out of curiosity, my heart sank. There she was, the woman, standing in the backyard just out of the camera's range, staring at my house. She didn't move for nearly an hour. I couldn't sleep after that. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind set my nerves on edge. I left the lights on in every room as if they could somehow protect me. By morning, I was exhausted but determined. I needed answers. The police were polite but dismissive. "No crime has been committed," the officer said, his tone laced with impatience. "But if you see her again, give us a call." It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for. I left the station feeling more alone than ever. That night, I decided to confront her if she came back. I stayed up, the blinds slightly open, my phone clutched tightly in one hand. Midnight came and went, and just when I started to think she wouldn't show, there she was. Standing in the same spot across the street, her face still hidden in shadow. I stormed outside, adrenaline overriding my fear. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. She didn't move, didn't say a word. The silence was deafening. I stepped closer, but before I could reach her, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. My courage crumbled, and I retreated back inside, locking the door behind me. The days blurred together after that. She was always there, watching, waiting. Sometimes she stood in the backyard, sometimes across the street, but she never came closer. I stopped leaving the house, too afraid to face her. My world shrank to the confines of these four walls. Then the note started. The first one appeared on my doorstep, a single sheet of paper with the words, "I'm always here," scrawled in messy handwriting. I called the police again, but they couldn't do anything. "It's probably just a prank," they said. But I knew better. Desperation led me to install more cameras, more locks, more alarms. My house became a fortress, but it didn't matter. She still found ways to get close, leaving notes and footprints as reminders of her presence. She was toying with me, and I didn't know why. One night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by my bed. I crept downstairs, every step feeling like a lifetime. The living room window was shattered, and the cold night air seeped in. She was inside. I searched the house, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the bat. Every shadow seemed to move, every corner a potential hiding spot. Then I saw her standing at the end of the hallway. Her face was finally visible, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Her eyes were empty, hollow, and her lips twisted into a sickening smile. Why are you doing this? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She tilted her head as if considering the question but said nothing. Then she took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what she would do next. I swung the bat, but she was faster, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost. The police found no evidence of an intruder, no signs of forced entry. They looked at me with pity as if I were losing my mind. But I wasn't crazy. I knew she was real. I could feel her presence even when I couldn't see her. She wasn't just stalking me, she was consuming me, erasing every shred of normalcy from my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. She was everywhere and nowhere. And now, as I sit here writing this, I realize there's only one way to end this. I have to face her once and for all. The lights are off, the door's unlocked. I'm waiting for her. If you find this, know that I tried. Know that I fought. But I don't think I'm going to win.
Started as a joke. We should totally sneak into the carnival after hours, Taylor said, her eyes glinting with mischief. By midnight, we were climbing the rusted chain-link fence, my heart pounding louder than I cared to admit. The carnival felt different without the noise of crowds and the laughter of children. The rides loomed in the moonlight, their shadows twisting into strange shapes. The air smelled of stale popcorn and grease, and the faint creak of the Ferris while turning in the wind set my nerves on edge. "This is so cool," Taylor whispered, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Jake nodded, his flashlight casting long beams across the empty grounds. "Let's check out the funhouse," he said. The funhouse looked even creepier than I remembered. The gaudy colors were faded, and the once bright lights flickered erratically. A painted clown grinned at us from the entrance, its face chipped and weathered. "After you," Taylor said, giving me a mock bow. I rolled my eyes but stepped inside, my stomach knotting with unease. Inside, the air was thick and musty. Mirrors lined the walls, warping our reflections into grotesque shapes. Taylor laughed, her distorted face stretching into a caricature of itself. "This place is so messed up," she said. Jake was ahead, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. I followed close behind, trying to ignore the way my reflection seemed to linger just a moment too long. As we turned a corner, the sound of faint laughter echoed through the funhouse. It wasn't any of us. We froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Probably just the wind," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's keep going," but my instincts screamed at me to turn back. The laughter came again, louder this time. It was high-pitched and unnatural, like something trying too hard to sound human. Taylor's grin faltered. "Okay, that's creepy," she admitted. Jake waved us forward, but I could see the tension in his jaw. "It's probably a recording," he said, his voice tight. "Old carnivals have weird stuff like that." We pressed on, the mirrors giving way to narrow corridors and crooked staircases. The funhouse seemed larger than I remembered, the layout twisting in ways that didn't make sense. The laughter followed us, closer now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. "We should leave," I said, stopping in my tracks. Taylor turned to argue, but before she could speak, a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Taylor frowned. "See what?" Jake's flashlight flickered, then went out. "Damn batteries," he muttered, smacking it against his palm. The darkness pressed in around us, suffocating and absolute. "Turn it back on," Taylor hissed. "I'm trying," Jake snapped. That's when we heard the footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the funhouse. Taylor grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Who's there?" Jake called out, his voice echoing eerily. There was no response, just the sound of the footsteps growing louder. Panic set in. "We need to get out of here," I said, pulling Taylor toward the entrance. But the way back wasn't clear. The mirrors and corridors seemed to shift, trapping us in a maze. The laughter returned, louder and more menacing than before. Jake found a door and pushed it open, revealing a small room filled with broken props and discarded costumes. We huddled inside, hoping whoever or whatever was out there would pass by. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and my heart nearly stopped with them. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a clown, but not like any I'd ever seen. Its makeup was smeared, its costume tattered and stained. Its eyes glinted in the dim light, and its smile was too wide, too sharp. "Found you," it said, its voice a guttural rasp. We bolted, pushing past the clown and sprinting down the hallway. The funhouse seemed to come alive, the walls closing in, the laughter echoing from every direction. I could hear the clown behind us, its footsteps quick and uneven, like it was enjoying the chase. "This way," Jake shouted, leading us down a narrow passage. But the clown was faster, appearing ahead of us as if by magic. Its grin widened as it raised a glinting knife. Taylor screamed, and we turned back the way we came. I don't know how we made it out of the funhouse. One moment we were running, the next we were bursting through the exit, gasping for air. But the carnival grounds weren't any safer. The lights flickered ominously, and the rides creaked as if alive. The clown was still behind us. We ran toward the Ferris wheel, hoping to lose it in the maze of metal and machinery. But the clown was relentless, its laughter ringing out across the empty grounds. "We have to split up," Jake said, his face pale with fear. "Are you crazy?" Taylor hissed, but he was already running in the opposite direction. Taylor and I stuck together, weaving through the carnival's labyrinth of booths and rides. The clown's laughter grew distant, and for a moment, I thought we'd lost it. But then I saw it again, standing at the end of the midway, its knife glinting in the moonlight. "Over here," Taylor pulled me into a storage shed, slamming the door shut behind us. We held our breath, listening for the clown's footsteps. They stopped outside the shed, and a shadow fell across the gap under the door. The doorknob rattled, and I clenched my fists, ready to fight. The door burst open, and the clown lunged inside. But we were ready. Taylor swung a metal pipe she'd found, striking the clown in the head. It stumbled, giving us just enough time to escape. We ran until we reached the fence, scrambling over it and collapsing on the other side. The clown stood on the other side, watching us with that unnerving grin. "See you soon," it said, its voice carrying over the night. We didn't stop running until we were home, but I knew it wasn't over. The carnival would always be there, waiting, and so would the clown.
The air was crisp, and the streets were silent as I tied my running shoes under the dim glow of the street lamp. Late-night jogs had become my escape, a time to clear my mind. I pressed play on my running playlist and started down the familiar path, the rhythm of my steps syncing with the beat in my ears. The neighborhood was peaceful, almost unnervingly so. Houses stood like silent sentinels, their windows dark. My breath formed small clouds in the cool air as I rounded the corner onto a stretch of trail that cut through a wooded area. Trees loomed tall, their branches bare against the night sky. I'd barely made it a quarter-mile down the trail when I felt it, a prickling at the back of my neck like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. Shaking it off, I picked up my pace, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The music in my ears was upbeat, but it did little to drown out the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Trees swayed gently in the wind, their shadows dancing across the path. I kept my eyes ahead, but the sensation of being followed grew stronger with every step. I paused to catch my breath, pulling out one earbud to listen to the night. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. And then, faintly, I heard it, the crunch of leaves behind me. My heart skipped a beat as I turned sharply. Trail was empty. "Get a grip, Miranda," I muttered, trying to laugh off the fear clawing at my chest. but as I turned back to the path, I saw it. A shadowy figure stood at the edge of the trail, barely visible in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. The figure didn't move. It was too dark to make out any features, but its outline was unmistakable. I froze, my mind racing. Was it a person? An animal? Something else? Before I could decide what to do, the figure took a step forward. I bolted, my legs moving faster than they ever had. The music in my earbuds was drowned out by the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. Trail seemed to stretch endlessly before me. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. I could feel the presence behind me, its energy cold and oppressive. The air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I turned onto a side path, hoping to lose whatever was following me. The side path led to an old park, its swings creaking in the wind. I stumbled to a stop near a bench, gasping for air. For a moment, the world was still. But then I felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. My eyes darted around the park. There it was. The figure stood under a broken street lamp, its shape darker than the shadows around it. Didn't move, but the air seemed to hum with its presence. My body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt like they were rooted to the ground. I forced myself to move, backing away slowly. "Leave me alone," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head as if it had heard me, and then it began to glide toward me. Not walk, glide, its movements unnaturally smooth. Panic overtook me, and I turned to run again, weaving through the park. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for me as I passed. My vision blurred with tears, but I kept going, desperate to get away. The path led me to a small footbridge over a creek. I stopped in the middle, clutching the railing for support. My breath came in ragged gasps. I dared to look back, hoping, praying that the figure was gone. But it was there, standing at the edge of the bridge. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. The air around it seemed to shimmer like heat waves rising off asphalt. I stepped back, my foot slipping on the wet wood. I caught myself before I fell, but the figure was closer now, halfway across the bridge. Its outline was sharper, more defined, and I could see what looked like hollow eyes staring back at me. My chest tightened, and I realized I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. The figure reached out, its shadowy arm extending toward me. Cold, unnatural wind whipped through the air, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was about to happen. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure stopped. The whispers faded, and the oppressive cold lifted. I opened my eyes to find the bridge empty. The figure was gone, but the air still felt heavy with its presence, as if it was watching from the shadows. I didn't waste any time. My legs finally obeyed, and I sprinted back the way I'd come, not stopping until I reached the safety of my apartment. I slammed the door behind me, locking it and collapsing onto the floor. My heart was still racing, my body trembling. Even now, hours later, I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for me. But something's different now. The shadows in my room seem to move on their own, stretching unnaturally toward my bed. A low, guttural whisper echoes in the silence, growing louder each time I try to ignore it. I'm not alone. The figure didn't stay on the bridge. Followed me home. And now, as I lie here in the dark, I realize the truth. I'll never escape it. Its hollow eyes are watching me from the corner of the room, waiting for the moment I let my guard down.